Hello there everyone. In this video I'm going to be talking about Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. This is a pretty interesting film because at its heart is the story of the rescue of the father within the mythology arc of the movie. And it's interesting that in a lot of our, not only our fairy tales, but in our everyday conversations even, we fail to recognize or realize the archetypical figures that loom large in the background in human society. So say, for example, when we talk about nature, we often refer to Mother Nature, right? In a similar vein, you've got the fatherland, right? You have the founding fathers in the United States. You've got all kinds of these very strong correlations between our daily mythos and the historical connection to these ancient mythologies. And I thought it would be interesting to explore this concept of the rescue of the father, which is deeply embedded inside this movie, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. It has a lot of layers to it, this movie. And we're only going to get into a few of them in this video. But hopefully it's a good beginning to look at the different things in other movies as well that exhibit a similar sort of train of thought or a similar storyline or a plot. So let's start off here. The movie opens with a young Indiana Jones as a Boy Scout, and he's exploring caves with his troop. He comes across a group of tomb raiders, and the leader of the raiders is dressed in a leather jacket and a brown fedora, which later becomes Indiana Jones's own signature style, as I'm sure you're all familiar. And he represents the hero archetype, which you'll see later on. The raiders have found the Golden Cross of Coronado. Now, Coronado was a Spanish conquistador. He was searching for the 7 cities of gold. So the allusion to gold is quite strong through this movie as well. Gold, as we discussed with the Wizard of Oz breakdown, gold symbolizes the alchemical process, turning lead into gold. That basically means taking something which is not valued at all or seems commonplace and turning it into something extraordinarily valuable. In this case, it's referring to the human soul. It's the hero's journey, effectively, and we see Indiana Jones going through this transformational process in becoming the hero archetype, just like literally the leader of the Tomb Raiders. So Indy steals the Golden Cross, and the raiders are chasing behind him, and he climbs onto a circus train. And the next few scenes that we see are very, very rich with imagery and very heavy on symbology. The first thing that happens is that he falls into the reptile car of this circus train and right into a pit of vipers, pit of snakes. So you've got snakes, lizards, and dragons in ancient archetypes, which have a very, very long history of representing chaos, disaster, disorder, the unknown. And you can see this in biblical imagery, where, for example, in the Garden of Eden, in the Genesis story, Adam and Eve are there, and then the snake whispers to Eve, and then she's cast out of the Garden of Eden after she listens to the snake and eats the fruit. In ancient Sumeria, the myth of Tiamat was very predominant, and this involved Tiamat was a dragon in this story, and dragons, lizards, and snakes are all fundamentally connected in our psyches, of course. You also see this play out with the myth of St. George and the dragon. It's a very similar motif yet again. Now, after his brush with chaos, Indy is left traumatized by his experience with the snakes. But what's interesting is that through his movies, right through the movies, he continues to face his fear of snakes and keeps journeying on in spite of his fear. So, for example, in Raiders of the Lost Ark, you see him coming face to face with a cobra in one scene. So he's always facing down, staring down the things that he's most afraid of. And we'll see why this happens in this movie. He meets the hero archetype as he's on the train after he's gotten out of this little pickle with the snakes. And they come face to face. But just as that happens, he falls into another cart inside the circus train, which contains a lion. The lion roars and stares blankly at him, ready to attack almost, if you will, but it's not an attack. This is Indiana Jones essentially coming face to face with his own mirror image of what he's going to become in the future. The lion in ancient mythology through to today has been a symbol of courage, valor, and internal sovereignty. The mane of the lion is also associated with the golden sun, which has Kabbalistic connotations. And that naturally is associated with warmth and light and knowledge, illumination, essentially. So consequent to this happening, Indiana Jones discovers a bullwhip with which to tame the lion, which again is very symbolic. So all this courage and pride and strength and valor, it has to be tamed slightly, right? And this is part of the process. When we discover our courage, we have to kind of teeter on the balance of being overly courageous or not being courageous enough. But he uses this bullwhip to take a courageous stand, and he snaps it, and the end of the whip catches him on the chin, which again is fairly symbolic because it leaves him with a scar. So every time we're standing up for something when we're using true courage, you will find yourself coming out with scars, mentally or psychologically, if not physically. Now, as this is happening, as he's kind of going through this battle, the hero archetype, the leader of the Raiders, rescues him and tells him that he's got heart. So this is his initiation almost. This entire process is his initiation. And you see this, where Indy begins to assert his own individuality and refuses to give them the Golden Cross. He uses a snake that's been sneaking in his shirt to escape from this encounter and bamboozles the Raiders with it. It's very cleverly scripted, it's very cleverly written. He then escapes into the magic cart, where he finds a magic box which he uses to evade capture. Now, what does the magic box represent? Well, the magic box and the magic card in general is representative of the magician in the tarot deck, in the tarot card decks that we find in occult traditions. And what he's done is that he's gained the power of illusion, theatrics, and trickery. And we've talked before in some videos about the trickster in the psyche, right? The trickster is not an evil archetype. The trickster is there because he adds to the toolbox of the hero, essentially. He's part of the magician's toolbox. And using all of these tricks of the trade, so to speak, again, we even use this phrase in common day language, he escapes again and runs off home to talk to his father or to show his father what he's accomplished. And as he's running off, you see the hero archetype, the leader of the Raiders, looking on and smiling in pride. So it's a pretty strong scene. Again, we see this, but we don't always acknowledge it in the movie. Now, when he gets home, his father is immersed in ancient tradition. Okay, you've got the father figure, Henry Jones Sr., who's immersed in the mythology of the Holy Grail. So he's trying to find and seek the answers through these mythologies for guaranteeing the safety of future generations, namely Indiana Jones, but he doesn't know this yet. Now, before Indiana Jones can share his adventures, the local sheriff comes and makes him return the cross. And we discussed in The Wizard of Oz how the sheriff in that movie represented authority, an order follower, an authority figure who's complying with tyranny. And the same thing's true in this case. But the hero archetype is also there, the leader of the raiders. And he tells Indy not to give up. He says, "You lost today, kid, but that doesn't mean you have to like it." And then he gives him his own fedora, which is on his crown, right? So he's passing on the mantle in a very literal sense to Indiana Jones, and Indiana Jones starts to embody the archetype of the hero now. And this is why I was saying he goes through literally the hero's journey, the transformation into the hero. The film then cuts to a fully grown Indiana Jones, dressed in his garb, the hero garb, who manages to recover the cross, and he gives the cross to the museum, so he's not doing it for selfish reasons. And neither we find, if we analyze the beginning of the movie, neither does the original hero archetype, who's the raider, the leader of the raiders. So he then meets Walter Donovan, whose men accost him and take him to his place of residence. And Donovan informs him that his father has disappeared while in Venice searching for the Holy Grail. Indy then receives his father's Grail diary in the mail, and of course the diary represents all the sum total of his father's wisdom and knowledge, which he's passing on to his son. At this point, Indiana Jones realizes that his father's in trouble, and he makes a decision to find him and rescue him. This has echoes of the same phenomenon in Pinocchio, for example. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. He and his father's friend, Marcus, travel to Venice, where they meet Dr. Elsa Schneider, who was working with Indy's father. She represents the unholy feminine, as we'll see later on. After some adventure and misadventure, they discover his father is being held in a castle in Austria by Nazis. He gets into the castle using trickery, subterfuge, and his physical prowess. So this is again a continuation of the hero's journey. We see this in Jason and the Argonauts, or many other Greek legends as well. Now, he makes his way to Austria to rescue his father, who is being held captive there. And he smashes in through the window of the room where his father's being kept. And his father hits him over the head with a vase, mistaking him for German Nazis. Now, the mistake in identifying the son, here's an interesting little aside for you. The same thing happens in the Pinocchio myth that we spoke about, where when Geppetto is trapped inside the belly of the whale, and that motif repeats itself in this film as well. Again, we'll discuss this later on. But when that happens and Pinocchio makes his way inside the whale, on first appearance, Geppetto mistakes a fish for his son. So the mistaking of the son is a recurring thing. And we'll talk about... I'll tell you why this happens. It's to do with the fact that when it comes to children, and especially sons, but daughters as well, there is this question that we have to ask ourselves. You can either be the son that your father wants you to be, or you can be the son that your father needs you to be. And I'm speaking also not only of the very real familial relationships we have with our parents, but also we're talking about the spiritual aspect as well. One could even term it the connection between man and God, if you will, right? If one is of that bent, as it were. Now, at the castle, Indy and his father learn that Elsa and Donovan are working with the Nazis, and they steal the diary from Indiana Jones, who's brought that diary with him, and his father, of course, chastises him, first of all, for putting himself in peril and in danger by trying to rescue him. And then obviously for not being wise enough to keep the diary away from this evil pair, as it were. But the Joneses escape, and at the end of this escape scene, Indy wants to take his father away from the danger and to run away from the danger of the Nazis. And they come to this literal crossroads. There's a scene where they're riding in a motorbike and they come to this literal crossroads. And what's interesting about that is that not only is that literal, but it's metaphorical as well. His father tells him that they have to go right into the heart of darkness in Nazi Germany to get the diary back so that they can prevent the Grail from falling into the wrong hands. So he's got a choice to make at this point, Indiana Jones. He faces another decision. Whether to be courageous in the face of evil and tyranny, or to take himself and his father to safety and end his journey. Of course, thanks to the guidance from his father, he chooses the former. And in the process of saving the diary, which is about to be burned in a book burning, he directly meets the face of evil, as it were, who is Adolf Hitler, as is portrayed in this movie. And he manages to get out of that scenario with serendipity and luck on his side. Having faced his worst fears, Indy and his father journey to the Middle East in order to try and recover the Grail. But the Nazis are already en route to the Grail location, having captured Marcus, his father's friend, who had a map that was given to him by Indy that belonged to his father's diary, right? It was inside the diary. So the Nazis take the map, they take Marcus, they imprison him. And as the story kind of goes on, Indy's father tries to rescue Marcus, but inadvertently gets recaptured himself, and he's sealed inside a tank. Now, he's literally in the belly of the beast at this point, and the tank's firing at Indy, bellowing fire and smoke. This is literally symbolic of the dragon, right, from ancient mythology again. And it echoes a very, very similar scene from Pinocchio, where the Geppetto is trapped in the belly of the whale, and they escape after setting fire inside the whale's belly. But the whale then starts bellowing smoke in an attempt to try and kill Pinocchio. Well, the same thing happens here, except to Indy. So Indy saves his father. But in the process, the tank runs off a cliff and he's on top of it. And everyone fears that he is dead. Now, his father up to this point hasn't expressed, although he's got a deep love for his son, which is evident from the fact that he wants him to stay out of harm's way all the time, he doesn't express his compassion and warmth until this point. And when he does, we see a mythical resurrection of Indiana Jones in the mythos of the film. And so they journey onwards after this happens. They have this very heartfelt reconciliation, and his father holds him close and tells him how much he means. And as I say, they journey onwards, where they're very close to the end of the journey. And what's happened is that the Nazis have already gotten to the Grail site. And they discover Indy, his father, Marcus, and I think it's his companion, Salah. Now, what happens is that every person that they send in to recover the Grail from this temple of sorts is killed. They're beheaded. That again is symbolic. Losing your head, as it were. So they realise that the only people equipped to retrieve the Grail are Indiana Jones and his father, Henry Jones Sr. But obviously they can't force Indy by killing him. So Donovan shoots his father instead. And now he's forced Indy's hand. He's used force and violence against his father in order to tyrannically force Indiana Jones to get this grail, this cup of life. So Indy must now journey through the underworld, through the unknown, to revive his father. But before he can get to the grail, as his father explains to him halfway through the movie, he has to go through 3 trials, which are noted in his father's diary, and they help him along the way. So he's being guided by the wisdom and the knowledge of his father. So it's a very literal passing on of the knowledge. In the first trial, only the penitent man shall pass. Indiana Jones has to humble himself. And that again is very symbolic. Because once you have enough humility to acknowledge that you don't know anything, that's the beginning of wisdom. That's the beginning of the journey. It's a microcosmic look almost at the hero's journey, even as it happens in the macrocosmic mythology arc of the film. The second trial is to follow in the footsteps of God. Now this again has very strong religious connotations, but also symbolically there is an occult connection to this as well. Where only by following in the path of God can he safely make his way forward. Now, inside certain traditions in secret societies such as Freemasonry, we see the same thing. You're following the path of God across from the checkerboard, which signifies your ignorance. So that's where you show humility, and up the steps, following literally in the steps of the path of God. Assuming one chooses the correct path of light as opposed to darkness. But nonetheless, the third trial he faces is the leap from the lion's head. So at this point, he has to take a leap of faith and trust in his father's guidance. And most importantly, trust in himself. And again, we see this lion symbology. The courage in the face of the unknown, because he's literally facing a great chasm. But it turns out the chasm itself is illusory. And because he's guided well, he manages to make his way across to the final resting place of the Grail. Now what happens is that the bad guy in this, if you will, Donovan, cheats and follows him to the final test. He makes his way across thanks to all the little breadcrumbs almost. This harkens back to Hansel and Gretel a little bit, but he makes his way across with the clues and the breadcrumbs that Indiana Jones has left behind, and so makes it to challenge the knight who is guarding the Grail. But then the absolutely final challenge that they face is to choose the true cup of Christ. And this is a tough choice because they've got not only the true, real Grail in that room, but also it's surrounded by all these different bejeweled cups that could be the Grail, supposedly. Now, Donovan chooses unwisely because he's seeking wealth and material abundance. So he looks at the most decorated cup made of gold, and decides that is the Grail, because that's the only thing fit for a king. And Christ, of course, was considered a king. Again, you've got the lion motif there, where the lion is the king of the jungle, which is why Christ was, in some scriptures, referred to as the Lion of Judah. Anyway, so he chooses unwisely, choosing the wealth and material abundance. And then we see time start to go very quickly. He starts to age very fast, and he dies crumbling into dust. And this is the key thing. Those that choose the material realm frequently find that all that they have accumulated and everything they've accomplished just turns to dust. And so that's obviously the wrong path to choose. it's time now for Indy to choose the cup. And he chooses correctly, choosing the cup that would belong to a humble son of a carpenter. The father-son motif again, very, very vivid in this. And because he chooses correctly, he's able to revive his father's spirit. And so his father is revivified by Indy's courage and his actions. He's resurrected. So this is almost literally the reverse of what we saw earlier, where his father's compassion, courage, and warmth resurrected Indy, and now Indy's courage and compassion and love resurrects his father. However, Elsa has succumbed to the material world just like Donovan, seeking to possess the cup of life for herself. And she's very, very heavily focused on this, on seeing the Grail as a prize rather than for what it truly is, which is a method for self-illumination, seeking the true knowledge of self. And what happens as a result of this possession, because she now has become ideologically and materially possessed, is that she dies, because the ground trembles, there's a giant earthquake, and the ground swallows her. Right? And this is symbolic of the unholy feminine, the desire for trappings of wealth. Right? And what happens is Mother Nature doesn't abide that. You see. At least in the mythology arc of the film again. But at the end of the movie, Indy, his father, Marcus, and Salah are unharmed, and they escape, having gained illumination through their journeys, because the end goal here in the film was never about the Grail, but about them going on the journey itself, the hero's journey. We saw this again with the Wizard of Oz as well. This is a very, very prevalent motif. And again, this is more about doing what is necessary in the face of overwhelming odds, things that seem impossible, in the face of evil itself, really, and doing so courageously. And the Wizard of Oz had exactly the same concept, where we saw the lion having to exhibit courage and the scarecrow having to use his intellect, and Dorothy, of course, going on this journey with them, and the Tin Man, of course, having to use his heart and his empathy and love. And we see all these same things again present in this movie. So good stories, I find, always have these archetypical features, if you will. What I also noticed about this film was that it also incorporated the alchemical symbology again of fire and water, which are very, very strong through this film. In the scene, for example, where they escape from the castle, Indy's father, Henry Jones Sr., lights the entire room on fire by accident with Indy's lighter. So the fire is everywhere, right? Then, of course, with the actual Grail itself, the cup of life holding the waters of life, which is very symbolic of the birthing process almost, if you will, as well. So the masculine and the feminine coming together, the generative principles to revivify and to give life. You see, this is what it's all about. Spiritual resurrection, physical resurrection, and of course the fact that this is the cup that catches the blood of Christ. Obviously we've got the link to the resurrection of Christ himself. So very, very powerful ideas that are in this film. And it's worthwhile watching it again just to see the other different things that you can pick up in it, because it is immense. But anyway, that's been my take on it. I hope that's been informative and entertaining and hopefully enjoyable in some sense. Thank you so much for watching. You guys are awesome for all of your support, all of the love that you've shown. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. Take good care of yourselves. God bless you, and we will speak again soon. Take care.